Hi folks, welcome to this video on English Language Paper 2, Question 4. If this is the first video you've watched in this series, go back through the playlist and start at question 1 because then this video will make an awful lot more sense. And if you haven't downloaded the exam paper from my website, I suggest you go and do that now. So it's amysmithliterature.wordpress.com, go to GCSE English Language Paper 2 and you can get the copy of the paper there. Okay, question 4 is a really complicated one, so we need to make sure we take this question step by step and really carefully tick off all of the keywords in the question. So the question says you need to refer to the whole of source A together with source B. So the examiner is expecting quite a lot of coverage of both sources. You've got to write about both of them as well. It then tells you to compare. So some people trip up on that particular word, thinking that compare only means similarities. In this context, it could be similarities or differences. And the question is going to tell us which one in a minute. Then it says compare how. The how is telling us that we need to analyse, and analyse means that we're going to identify the writer's methods, so personification, verbs, adjectives, etc., and then why those particular methods are being used. So it says compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes towards Italy. So we're looking for differences, we're looking for attitudes, and then the topic of the question is about what they think about the country of Italy. When we talk about attitudes, we're thinking about someone's opinion towards something. Then we have some bullet points that remind us to compare their different attitudes, to compare the methods they use to convey their attitudes, and to support your ideas with references to both texts. So what we need to focus on here is methods, and the examiner is reminding us of it there. We have 16 marks for this question, so you're going to need to write a fair bit for it, and you've got about 16 minutes and definitely no more than 20 minutes to do your answer for this. So what are attitudes then? Well, the exam paper might use different words for this. So it might say attitudes, perspectives, thoughts, or feelings. We're looking for what the writer thinks about the topic that they're discussing. And if you've got the exam paper downloaded from my website, you will see that I've got a list of words or vocabulary that you could use to talk about writers' attitudes. If there's any words on that list that you don't know, I suggest you make some flashcards with the word on one side and the definition on the back, and then test yourself so that you learn this vocabulary. So we've got words like optimistic, joyful, admiring. So these are really positive words which would describe a writer's positivity towards a particular topic. We've got words that express sadness, so the writer might feel distraught about the topic, they might feel that it's quite monotonous or quite boring, they might be disillusioned about something, so losing faith in it and so on. Okay, so if you want to stop the video, you can read through all the words and get a handle on what they mean. So let's start with source A, which is by Dickens, and let's think about which words we could apply to this particular source. So in paragraph 1, Dickens says that there is nothing in Italy more beautiful to me than the coast road between Genoa and Spezia. So that first sentence is really positive. So I'm going to look at the positive sections of my vocabulary list. If I look at happy, we've got the word joyful, admiring in there. Admiring is probably the most accurate. He admires the beauty of this particular coast road. Dickens then goes on to give a really specific and detailed description of the landscape itself. So I think admiring is probably the right word there. In the final paragraph, however, we have a bit of a change. This is where Dickens describes how terrible the weather is as he's going in his carriage through Italy. So it says, it was not in such a season, however, that we traversed this road on our way to Rome. The middle of January was only just past. It was very gloomy and dark weather, very wet besides. And he goes on to talk about the rain and the wind and how awful the weather is. So we are looking at our vocabulary list, and we're probably going to be looking at something a little bit more negative. So if we look at the sad section, Dickens, you might say that he feels isolated. As he's travelling through Italy, he might be apprehensive or unsettled because of the stormy weather that he's travelling through and so on. So once you've learned your vocabulary, then have a look at the source and think about which words apply to this particular source. Okay, then we've got to think about source B as well. And if we look at the start of it, Middleton says that my abiding memory of my first few days in Italy is the heat. Oppressive and insistent, it invaded every corner of my hotel room, so that even the tiles on the bathroom floor radiated waves of warmth. A lot of hyperbole going on here. It's probably quite a negative depiction at the start. So if we look at the negative sections then of this vocabulary list, we might be thinking that Middleton feels quite disillusioned, potentially, with going to Italy. She's surprised that she doesn't like the weather as much as she thought she would. She might feel quite powerless, quite vulnerable because of the strength of the weather. However, by the end of the source, she says the heat had no claim over me anymore. I was completely in love with Italy. So she falls in love with the place at the end of the source. So we're going to the positive vocabulary on our list. We could think about how optimistic she might be at the rest of her holiday in Italy, how joyful she is that she's fallen in love with the country. Okay, so now that we've thought it through, we're going to plan our response. And because it's a comparison question, I'm going to do this using a table. So source A in the first column and source B in the second column. And I filled in the first column to give you an example of this. So here we're thinking about how Dickens admires the landscape. Our evidence was from paragraph 1. And then I'm thinking about how awed and impressed by the weather Dickens was, although maybe he didn't like it that much. And that's at the end of the source. So your job now is to think about these paragraphs from source B. What is Middleton's attitude to Italy and what line number are we going to use for that? And we're going to come up with 2 ideas. So stop the video, have a go at filling in the second part of the table, and then start the video again when you're ready. Okay, so your ideas might be slightly different to mine, but I've said that Middleton is oppressed and unsettled by the heat. That's lines 6 to 8. But then by the end of the source, she's overwhelmed by the beauty of the city, and that's lines 26, 27, and 31. So I've got my plan. Now I need to make sure that I'm making like for like comparisons so that I'm linking things that are directly related to each other. And I've done this using the arrows that you can see on the screen. So with Dickens, he admires the landscape. And then I've linked that to the second idea for source B, because this is about the writer's attitude to the kind of landscape that they're in, the cityscape that they're in. And then I've put the weather together as well. So Dickens kind of awestruck by the weather, whereas Middleton feels oppressed by the weather. So I've just checked there that my comparisons are like for like. Right, done all that planning and all that thinking, now we need to write our answer. So what is the examiner actually looking for when we write this? Well, we need to make really clear links between the texts. We need to identify the writer's attitudes, choose a range of quotations, so not just one quote from each source, but a range of quotes, and then analyse these quotations, so the method and why that method has been used. So those are the 4 things that I've got in my head as I'm writing my answer. And here's the example, right? It is quite a long answer, but we've got 16 marks for this question and we've got 2 sources to deal with. So in yellow, I've indicated where I've identified the writer's attitudes and also where we've got the comparisons using those connectives to make links between the sources. In green, I've got the quotations, using a range of quotations as much as I can from both sources. In blue, I've identified the methods, and then in pink, I've explained why those particular methods are used. Okay, so if you stop the video, read through the example answer, and then start the video again when you're ready. Time for you to do some more work then. So if you've downloaded the exam paper from the website, you've got the sentence starters. Use the plan that we've made as well, and you're going to write your answer. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and the next video will be on question 5.